And that's for you, smart guy.
Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brad and John, they're the ones to follow. Yeah, ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
More importantly, it's Brad's therapy session. That's what it is, right, John?
Oh, Brad, it's a joy to be a part of it with you every weekday, Brad.
And you know what the problem with that is, John?
What's that?
Even though you're my therapist, I looked you up, and you're not on the professional register in the state of Missouri. So
I'm an undocumented therapist.
By the way, if we get time, we got an abbreviated show today. I have to tell you, interesting thing, because you say certain things. The smartest woman in the world, who's your biggest fan, by the way, John, is doing research on our show, and she doesn't listen to us live. She listens to the podcast or the YouTube version. I don't know which. And yesterday she did some interesting research because she is the queen of the internet. A couple interesting things came up about what we talked about yesterday. Maybe we'll get to them in Block B. But first, in Block A, we started off with John Combest, C-O-M-B-E-S-T. That's him. Former comms guy for Monsanto/Bayer. He's worked for the Secretary of State. He's worked for John Ashcroft. Once upon a time, he worked plotting out how many hours a night Joe Biden gets to sleep. It's John Combest, and every single day he works on his site, which is johncombest.com. He lists all the important stories. We start off the show every morning with this guy.
I'm Casey Kasem.
And John distills it down to 3 big items. And we start off with...
In third place...
Brad, you might want to check your phone. I know that you leave your notifications on during the show, which listeners can hear. You might have gotten some text messages for political candidates over the last few weeks. Have you received any over the last few weeks, Brad?
Be honest with you, the only ones I've gotten were for Trump.
Wow, interesting. So no text from Missouri political candidates, Brad? That's good for you, I guess, right?
Well, they won't have anything to do with me either on the text or buying advertising from me, so they just ignore me like I don't exist.
Oh, there we go. We made it to Tuesday for that one. Well, speaking of text messages, Brad, a piece from the Southeast Missourian today talks a little bit about the loophole that political candidates use to get around telemarketing laws. Now, Brad, I'm sure you have a lot of experience with direct marketing, so I'm sure you're an expert on this. But I didn't know about this till I read it in the Southeast Missourian piece. There's something called the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, the TCPA. And most people think of that as protecting consumers from robocalls, which is true. But do you know how political candidates get around it, Brad? And I'll give you a hint. It's not a First Amendment argument. Do you know how they get around this?
The calls come from out of the country.
No, that's a good guess, though. Apparently, the only way that you're protected from political text messages or text message solicitations is if they're entered into some sort of a system manually. So as long as the political candidate doesn't use what's called an auto dialer, they can text message you at will. Did you know about this, Brad?
Oh yeah, they're just buying a mailing list. That's all they're doing. You know, I mean, when you when you sign up for stuff, you opt in for stuff. You don't necessarily, it's all about the TOS, the terms of service. If everybody read the terms of service, the things they agreed to, they'd go like, "Oh my God, I didn't know I agreed to that." And that,
I can't believe I agreed to be tracked everywhere
right,
I go.
Exactly. Yeah, it's that.
And so the Southeast Missourian, excuse me, put a note up on their Facebook page, and they asked for examples of text messages they received, and they heard from a candidate named Chris Dinkins. Now, Chris Dinkins is a state representative. We've talked about her before on the show. She's running for state senate this year down in the southeast part of the state, but she really defended text messages, and she says, here's her quote: "I know people say they don't like texts, just like they say they don't like TV ads, radio ads, newspaper ads, or direct mail. But the reality is that candidates have to have a way to communicate with voters." And she went on to say that, with a lack of local media coverage, Brad, this is something that you've talked about at length, with a lack of real reporters, voters are looking for ways to get information. And she also points out that with her campaign, some people have an option to opt out, but she says that she's heard from voters that say, "Hey, thank you for this. I wish there was more local reporting about campaigns. I wish there was more of an effort to get information out from voters. Go ahead, Brad.
What's her name again?
Her name is Chris Dinkins, Dinkins.
Oh, so hold on. That would make her initials CD. That can't be because her initials are BS.
Oh, you don't think that that's true, Brad?
I think she's so full of you know what. I mean, give me the quote again. Give me the quote again.
She says, I know people say they don't like text, just like they don't like TV ads, radio ads, newspaper ads, or direct mail. But the reality is that candidates have to have a way to connect, to communicate with voters. So here's her quote about this. Quote, a lot of people reply back and say they are happy to get more info because they haven't heard of any of the candidates. You don't think that's true, Brad?
Do you know what? Recently, she also came out with a study in the state of Missouri that car owners are happy to have their cars inspected because they love finding out all the problems with their cars, and they send her notices like, Miss Dinkins, is that her name again? Dinkins?
Yeah, Miss Dinkins.
Miss Dinkins, thank you so much for enacting these egregious vehicle inspection laws, because we found out the fact that one of our shock absorbers was bad, and if it wasn't for you and your egregious vehicle inspection laws, we wouldn't have known that. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. She's full of BS.
I'm going to take the other side of this and say that she's probably heard from some people that are supporters of hers that have said, thank you, Chris. I love receiving these text messages from you. Is that representative of most voters? Probably not.
John.
But I wouldn't say she's lying about this. Now, by the way, Brad, one reader in the survey from Facebook says that she receives texts that she doesn't appreciate from one statewide candidate. You want to guess who that is, Brad?
Bill Eigel.
No. I'll give you a hint. When this show started, and as recently as, say, 6 weeks ago, you had an imaginary beef with this statewide candidate.
Are you talking about Mike Carter?
I am, yeah, Judge Mike Carter. This woman says, she, quote, it doesn't matter whether I agree with them or not. I don't appreciate the texts. Now, Mike Carter famously left, I believe he left voicemails for people on Mother's Day. I believe most people got either a text message or a voicemail message from Mike Carter wishing them a happy Mother's Day. So, I mean, he's known for using voicemail and phone calls in an innovative way, Brad.
Well, look, Mike Carter's an interesting guy. And to the point where he understands technology and advertising and marketing probably better than 99.99999% of the candidates out there, including their consultants, shall we say. Now, can I take this one step further?
Sure.
Okay, this is interesting to me because of the fact that the politicians get a pass on this because of the fact that there's a loophole and they can text you. It's the same thing with yard signs, okay? How many times have I yacked against yard signs? Over the weekend, I cannot give you the name of this person, but I know someone who is on a committee to reelect someone, and they were bragging to me about how they worked so hard over the weekend. They put up 600 yard signs. I just wanted to stick my finger in my mouth and throw up. I'm going because here's two of my points. First off, in most areas, like for example, in St. Peter's, I don't know if this is still the case, the guy was referred to as the yard sign Nazi, and to the point where in St. Peter's, once again, I haven't seen this in a number of years, but let's say 10 years ago, this guy was to the point where any kind of a yard sign, if it wasn't like a house for sale sign, bulk, he'd pick it up, he'd yank it, he'd just drive around in his truck. And matter of fact, there used to be a spot in the back of St. Peter's City Hall by a dumpster, because once again, I saw it one day. I parked back there and I go, look at that, that's where all the yard signs go. He just throws all the yard signs back there. But once again, when it comes time for election time, the politicians can stick yard signs anywhere they want. It's to the point where it's like, okay, double standard. Now, if I started putting yard signs out there for Westplex 107 or hold on a minute, or the BJ show, they would be yanked down. So once again, the politicians get a special deal right now. Even in our radio advertising, we have to give them a rate that nobody else gets. We have to give them the absolute positive lowest rate. We can't gouge them, and trust me, politicians, when it comes this time of the year, they get gouged on billboards and they get gouged on yard signs and everything else, but not for radio because our TV, because of the fact that we have these laws that allow the politicians to have special privilege. I say that's wrong. The politicians shouldn't have any special privileges. Zero, zip, none. How's that, John? How did I do?
What's a better option than yard signs, Brad? Is there an advertising option for folks in the Westplex that's better than yard signs?
I would say on the back of matchbook covers, because everybody uses matchbooks nowadays. You know, when you light your when you light your doobie, everybody said, now, you know what I'm going to say. I'm going to say radio, but which is interesting.
But is there a specific address, Brad, that people could go to learn about political advertising?
It's funny you should mention that. AugustElection.com. AUGUST.
Oh, really?
August
Okay. It took a little while to lead you there, but can you repeat that, Brad? Something was wrong with my headphones. Can you repeat that one more time?
God. AugustElection.com. Okay, we got to move on. Number 2.
Up a notch to number 2.
Speaking of radio folks, Brad, and people who don't complain as much as others, Mike Elam was in for Mark Reardon yesterday, and he had Dean Plocher, Speaker of the House and running for Secretary of State on. We'll get back to Dean in a second. Another Secretary of State interview, Jamie Corley, who's running for Secretary of State, was on the record with Mark Maxwell, KSDK. Now, there's an abridged version of the interview that KSDK has up. I linked today to the full interview with Jamie Corley, along with timestamps. Jamie Corley was also on with Rosenbaum and the seat warmer gal. And I didn't put timestamps up for that yesterday, but I have Mark Maxwell timestamps up today. Excuse me. Dean Plocher said several interesting things when he was on with Mike Elam. Mostly talked about illegal immigration. And interestingly, he talked about the state budget. And he believes that the state legislature will uphold Governor Parson's vetoes, that the vetoes from Governor Parson will indeed stand. And Dean Plocher suggests that some of these vetoes make sense, that the House passed a conservative budget and that the governor got rid of a little bit more funding. So that was interesting, Brad. And also speaking of Dean Plocher, today at 11 o'clock on This Week in Missouri Politics Midweek Update, which you can find a link to on my website today, Scott Fawn is going to reveal a Dean Plocher logo that he says is the worst logo in the history of Missouri politics. And he wouldn't show it on camera yesterday, Brad, but you have to tune in today at 11 a.m. on This Week in Missouri Politics to see what Scott describes as an abysmal, a horrific, and atrocious logo.
Is this for his candidacy as SOS? Is that what the logo is for?
Yeah, for Dean Plocher's campaign as Secretary of State. Anyway, it was good to hear Mike Elam. I guess Reardon's out all week. You know, Sue was on, Brad. And I don't know, she does Sue's News. Did you know that she started her radio career by broadcasting in a broom closet?
Did she talk about this again? Did she talk about...
Well, she said that it was either, the way she described it, it was either like a lean-to. I think she was down by the railroad tracks, like some hobo had set up like a lean-to. They had like a pot of pork and beans, as she described it. And she was talking into like a tin cup. Anyway, but that's how she got her start. And then can you imagine today, Brad, she's on 97.1 with Mike Elam.
I gave her start in radio, and that's how she treats me. You know,
and it was in a broom closet, right?
That's not the
Brad,
first...
I'm making this up. She didn't say anything about that. She gave a weather and road report, Brad.
I thought for sure she went in.
I'm just getting you going.
She's done that before. She talked. I started my radio career in this little tiny crappy place, and I worked for Brad.
Well, it was the call letters were KRAP, Brad.
Okay, on to number 1.
The number 1.
We got a Trump endorsement, a vaunted Trump endorsement. You'll remember 2 years ago, Donald Trump endorsed in the U.S. Senate primary in Missouri, and he endorsed Eric, which described 2 candidates. But boy, he picked just one candidate in the 3rd Congressional District Republican primary, and that candidate is Bob Onder, Brad. Trump tweeted, I guess it's not a tweet, I guess it's more of he did a Truth Social post, and he said, a highly respected physician and attorney, Bob, being Bob Onder, was a delegate for us in 2016 and has been an incredible voice for MAGA and the great people of Missouri. So, big endorsement, Brad. In fact, the first place it was mentioned was on Scott Fawn's Midweek Update yesterday. And a big deal. I mean, it's this is the type of endorsement that can tip a race. I think Bob Onder was doing pretty well in this race before the endorsement, and it's a BFD, Brad.
Two things, John. You said yesterday on Scott Fawn's midweek update, isn't Monday the beginning of the week?
Yeah, and last week I pointed that out, Brad. I said the phrase I used last week was Christmas comes early because the midweek update, as we get closer to the primary elections on August 6th, Scott is running what are traditionally midweek updates on a Tuesday or Wednesday or even a Thursday. Scott is running them several times a week. So Scott will be on, I believe, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of this week because there are just so many campaigns going on.
Okay, first off, couple things off top of my head. Lots of action with the governor's race, with three-way race, which I think everybody is now sort of admitting that Eigel is becoming a component of that, whereas before he was sort of looked at like, he's the third guy. Lots of activity on that. Lots of activity on the SOS thing. I don't hear squat on CD2 and CD3 except for what you just talked about with Onder this morning. I don't hear anybody talking about those races. What's going on with that?
Well, I know that the Jefferson City News Tribune is having a forum for what that's worth today. I believe Schaefer and Onder will both be there. I'm not certain, but they were advertising it over the weekend. They, being the News Tribune, was advertising it. There will be nothing that happens in the 2nd Congressional District race because it's not a competitive race.
So everybody's pretty much it's Ann Wagner. She's in and
correct. Yeah,
and nothing's going on. Okay. Now, yesterday we talked about this on the air. I drove out on the interstate on actually 170 and took the picture of the Crystal Quade billboard. Okay. Now, first off, I like Crystal Quade. I like her background story. The ad she did I thought was very effective. I'll be honest with you, John, that to me is one of the worst billboards I've seen. Your reaction?
I don't get it. I don't. And for folks who haven't seen it, there's a picture of Crystal on the left-hand side.
Right.
And then there's some diamonds or some gems. It's a nice, pretty blue background. And it says Crystal Quade for governor. And then the line says, her agenda is you. And you is underlined. And then there's a pointy sign that's pointing down and to the right. And I don't know what it's pointing to. And the only thing I could think of, Brad, I agree with you in that I'm mystified by this. Maybe the idea here is to build intrigue. The only thing I can think of is maybe this is like the first set in a series of billboards. You get what I'm saying? Like maybe this is intentionally a vague message, and then in August there'll be a different one in that same place. You get what I'm saying?
I couldn't.
Maybe it's maybe it's an episodic storytelling, Brad.
Couple things. The finger pointing down is the old-timey finger that would say, "Hey, get your brain sandwich here." And there's
exactly.
there's like a finger, like the old, I mean, you can pull it up nowadays. And not only that, okay, her name across the top of the billboard is in relatively small type.
Hey, you know what I just realized, Brad? She misspelled her own name.
Really?
She left out the T in Crystal. Crystal Quade. Look at the picture you sent me again.
Are
Crystal Quade for governor.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Hold on, let me look.
Now, hold on. Is this really? Did she really pay for this, or did somebody else buy this billboard to mock her?
It's sitting up on 170, John. I mean, 170, very highly trafficked. This billboard is on 170 between Page and St. Charles Rock Road.
So let me play devil's advocate here. What if this isn't actually paid? Now, I don't see a paid for message on here. And what if this is not by Crystal? Crystal Quade's not going to misspell her own name.
I heard. I got to pull it up.
Crystal Quade.
I got all my pictures from yesterday. I'm looking through them. I'll be damned if you're not right. Crysal.
Crystal Quade for governor. Her agenda is Hold it.
Look on the left side of the billboard. There's the message.
You're right. Okay, let's see what this says.
It's done vertically. It's done vertically on the left side of the billboard, and it
paid
says
for by Show Missouri Truth. Katie Magan Treasure. What is Show Me? Let's look this up, and maybe we can look this up on the break.
John, you and I are
Show Missouri Truth.
You and I are doing.
I wonder if that's an anti-Crystal Quade group. Show Missouri Truth.
Why would you do this?
That is a nonpartisan organization looking for civil discourse in our state. Well, maybe they're a right-wing group that's mocking her. Yeah, let's get back to basics. I don't know. We can look into what this is about.
John?
Katie Maginn, Maginn, treasure.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?